the statement, highly unusual statement from President Bush and Laura Bush, a joint statement about the urgent need to take care of refugees, including a much larger population. They're calling for a much more expansive refugee program. They say that we have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, a legal responsibility. We have the resources. Members of Congress say they passed the legislation on the defense supplemental. It's all there. And they're talking about the kind of broader refugee program that goes well beyond the categories you have identified, that is closer to what we saw after Vietnam and the Cuban migrations. And in talking to Leon Panetta today and other former officials from many administrations, those migrations deeply enriched our country with people of great intellect and vigor and abilities such as the Afghans. So is the State Department going to go beyond these categories and, according to the Bushes, cut the red tape? We have an obligation to get rid of all this bureaucratic red tape. And with that supplemental and what Congress passed, members of Congress, many Democrats, are saying that you guys are being way too bureaucratic in the requirements to get the people out of there and then process them.
Andrea, that is precisely what we are trying to do. Our goal is to bring to safety as many Afghans as we possibly can for as long as we can. And we have spoken to the broad categories of Afghans for whom we are going to extraordinary lengths to bring them to safety. We have spoken about the Afghan special immigrant visa holders. We have spoken about those so-called Priority 1 referrals to the U.S. Refugee Assistance Program. The new category for Afghans, these are Afghans who have helped the American people over the years, who have worked closely with U.S. organizations,
but what about
NGOs.
This larger program, Ned, and how do they get to Kabul?
In NGOs.
How do these people ever get to Kabul, no less the airport?
In NGOs and media organizations as well. This was a broad and new category that we announced to resettle an even larger universe. But we are also working to do all we can for a category of Afghans we're calling Afghans at risk. And Afghans at risk refers to women, it refers to girls, to human rights defenders, journalists, other civil society actors who might not otherwise qualify for the SIV program, for the P1 referral, or for the so-called Priority 2 referral. So again, we are going to extraordinary lengths. We are gratified to have a partner in Congress that over the course of several weeks now, we have worked with, especially in the context of the SIV program, to cut some of that red tape. As you know, the SIV program, it is defined by statute. If memory serves, there are 14 steps that were written into statute that an SIV applicant would need to go through before he or she could be considered a special immigrant and be granted access to the United States. But let me just offer a bit more context, because I think it's important as to what we've done. When this administration came into office, and let me just take a step even further back. We have spoken of the SIV program, of course, in recent days, in recent weeks. But this is a program that has existed for years now. The United States government, over the course of those many years, has welcomed more than 76,000 Afghan special immigrants. That is to say, Afghans who, at great personal risk to themselves or to their families, have helped the United States government over the years. In recent days alone, we have brought 2,000 of them to the United States, and most of them have now begun their new lives through refugee, But Christina, I promise I'll come back to you.
We all have questions about today, so if you guys, if my colleagues want to go, that's fine. But we know this history, Ned. We do. We've got limited time, and we've got a lot of questions.
I will come right back to you. But let me just, because I think the context is not unimportant. What is also true is that when we came into office, there was a large backlog of SIV applicants, who had waited months or even longer. We have gone to extraordinary lengths since the earliest days of this administration to shorten that backlog, to cut some of that red tape. We have worked with Congress.
Congress says that it's only because of their pressure that you were way behind, not you personally, but the State Department lagged terribly on this and that they had to force this legislation.
This was a backlog, Andrea, that we inherited. When we came into office in January 20th, there were thousands upon thousands of special immigrant applicants who were in this backlog. We have been gratified to find a partner in Congress. We have worked with Congress to cut some of this bureaucratic red tape. Again, it's a 14-step process. So on top of that, as the security situation began to change, of course, our embassy went on ordered departure on April 27th. Even with the ordered departure, we were able to surge additional resources to Kabul, consular officers specifically, to take on some of this backlog and to make progress. Just as we did that, we moved some of the functions that previously were being conducted in Kabul to the United States so that we could have even greater resources dedicated to that. With those steps, we were able to cut many, many months off the average wait time for SIV applicants. Our embassy in Kabul, I should say, did all of this under stressful, intense circumstances and amidst a COVID outbreak. COVID, of course, was a limiting factor in terms of how much not only the last administration was able to do against this backlog, but also for us, especially as COVID took a particularly severe turn at our embassy in Kabul. Over the course of April, May, June, July, if you look at the average processing times, we shaved significant processing times off of each of those
But over the course of those months,
applicants.
you've gotten 2,000 people out.
That is not true.
Well, you're up to 2,000. You just said 2,000 was the number you said.
2,000, if you would let me finish. So on top of all that, we started an ambitious, aggressive relocation effort, Operation Allies Refuge. We have relocated 2,000 Afghan special immigrants through Operation Allies Refuge. Many more, hundreds more special immigrants were traveled to the United States before Operation Allies Refuge began.
Correct. So since Allies Refuge, you've gotten 2,000 people out. 2,000. You now have less than 14 days to get how many? 40,000, 60,000? With a limited staff at a tiny embassy that you're operating out of the airport. I'm not impugning the difficulties for the State Department employees. I am sure they're working hard. I'm sure they're trying their best. But do you really think logistically it is possible to make any kind of a dent in that and get those people out? Furthermore, what is the order for who is coming out of the airport? Is it, you said it's not embassy staff anymore, so it is American citizens, then SIVs, then who is coming out in what order? And if I'm a woman or a girl and I show up at the airport, does that qualify me as a P2, as a person of special consideration?
So a couple things. We are going to do, and we are doing, as much as we can for as long as we can to relocate, to bring to safety, whether that is to the United States or elsewhere, vulnerable Afghans, whether they are SIV applicants, whether they have refugee status, whether they fall into other vulnerable categories. You've heard from DoD that the Department of Defense has been in a position to relocate tremendous lift capacity. So now that the airport is under the control of the Department of Defense, not only U.S. military aircraft have been able to land and take off, but also charter aircraft. It is also a goal of the United States and our international partners to see to it that the commercial flights are able to take off and land. This is something that we are working on very closely with our partners, with Afghans on the ground. The reinitiation of commercial operations would add tremendous capacity to those seeking to relocate from Afghanistan. In terms of prioritization, of course, our first priority, our first responsibility is always going to be to the American people. So we've spoken of our relocation, repatriation of our direct hire staff. That has now completed for the time being. I told you today that we have notified the first tranche of private American citizens who have expressed an interest in being repatriated to the United States. So those Americans, we're not offering numbers, but it's the first tranche, and I expect several tranches of Americans and their families, giving them explicit instructions about where and when to go. And we are going to do as much as we can for as long as we can for refugees or other vulnerable Afghans who may be interested in relocation. Nick.